Hi everyone, in this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at a game played between Judit Polgar and Viswanathan Anand. This was played in the 1999 Dos Hermanas Tournament in Dos Hermanas, Spain. And without further ado, let's look at this game. Polgar has the white pieces and she opens with e4, c5 by Anand, the Sicilian defense, knight f3, d6, the open variation, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and now a6, the Najdorf variation, although this does change to another variation of the Sicilian. Bishop e3, and now e6, so this is the Scheveningen variation, and after g4, Polgar has now played the Keres attack, which is kind of similar to this idea of b5 and b4 to misplace this c3 knight. Just like that, Polgar is trying to play g5 and misplace this f6 knight. So Anand plays e5, getting a discovery on the g4 pawn, and you can imagine that if Polgar plays something like knight b3, then bishop takes g4, and Anand has simply grabbed the pawn. So Polgar instead plays knight f5, which blocks the attack of the bishop to the pawn on g4, and now Anand plays g6. He knows that if Polgar moves the knight, then he will simply grab the pawn on g4, and he'll be up a pawn again. But here, Polgar plays g5, and this is something you would rather not expect, because you're simply giving up a whole piece. Because after g takes f5, Polgar actually plays e takes f5. If you play g takes f6 here, then there's simply f4, and after bishop d2, queen takes f6, and not only is the bishop locked, but after knight d5, queen d8, Black can simply play bishop e6, and after bishop takes d5, he eliminated the knight, and with that out of the way, he can simply consolidate his position. So that's why after g takes f5 was played, Polgar played e takes f5. And here, Anand played d5. He didn't retreat his knight, because if he plays something like a knight fd7 or knight g8, there's the problem of queen to h5, and after this bishop comes to c4, we can see the enormous amount of pressure on the f7 pawn, and this is probably the main reason why Anand didn't want to bring his knight back to d7, and rather why he played d5, trying to gain some counterplay. And this d5 move is stating that if g takes f6 is played, then there's simply going to be d4, and now Polgar has nothing. She has tripled pawns here, and there's also a threat on one of these two minor pieces, and, well, you can imagine Polgar's situation if she played g takes f6 here. So instead, she played queen f3, trying to get her queen into the game, maybe start an attack. This does allow d4, however, and Polgar was kind of forced to castle queenside now, to use the pin on the queen on d8. Now the pawn on d4 can't take the knight or the bishop because rook takes d8, and yeah, that's winning. So knight bd7 by Anand, simply closing down the d-file, and now there actually is a threat of grabbing the knight or the bishop. So here, Polgar decides to sacrifice the knight, and she plays bishop to d2. This bishop to d2 move is stating that after d takes c3, Polgar will simply play bishop takes c3. And now, despite the fact that she's down two pieces, she has an enormous amount of counterplay. I mean, she has this diagonal for herself, and now Anand has to constantly worry about whether he'll get checkmated or not, and he has to stay alert a lot, and this could burn tons and tons of his time. So bishop g7 was played here. Bishop g7 is just trying to reinforce the knight on f6, and also just getting ready to castle kingside. Anand cannot keep his king in the center for too long, so he must start his castling. Rook g1 by Polgar, simply controlling the g-file, and now castles by Anand. And now Polgar finally grabs the knight on f6, and after queen takes f6, queen e3 by Polgar, having a very sneaky threat. Here, we can imagine that if something like b5 was played, for example, then Polgar has this rook takes d7 move. And rook takes d7, at first glance, it looks like a bad move because you've simply just given up a rook. But after bishop takes d7, there's this bishop takes e5 move, and now, well, this is just a bad position for Anand. If he moves his queen, then bishop takes g7 or rook takes g7, both work. And if he grabs the bishop, then after the simple queen takes e5, Polgar is simply up a lot of material. So that's why after this queen e3 move, Anand played king h8. Now the same idea of rook takes d7 doesn't work, because if bishop takes d7 is played, bishop takes e5 doesn't work because, well, the king is not on the g file. And you might think, well, isn't there rook takes g7 to try taking advantage of, well, the fact that if king takes g7, then bishop takes e5 wins, or that if queen takes g7, bishop takes e5 wins? Well, Anand can actually just play queen takes g7. And if bishop takes e5 is played here, then it's simply lost, because f6, and after bishop g3, we can see that Anand has two rooks against a minor piece, and he'll easily win this game. So that's why, after this king to h8 move, Polgar did not play rook takes d7, but rather she played f4, trying to attack the e5 pawn. And now if e takes f4, seemingly winning some material, because if bishop takes f6, then you'll grab the queen. Then after this, bishop takes g7 check, and now bishop f6 is actually checkmate. So that would end up bad for Anand. So he must play queen to b6, and he's trying to exchange queens. If he can exchange queens, then with an extra knight, I believe that Anand can easily win the game. So queen g3 by Polgar. She, of course, does not want to trade queens. And she's also trying to threaten queen takes g7 checkmate. And now queen to h6 by Anand. Trying to maybe, in the future, play something like queen takes f4 check, because that'll trade queens, and that'll be easier for him to play. And after queen h6, rook d6 by Polgar. This is a deflection, and it's basically saying that if queen takes d6 is played here, then queen takes g7, and this is checkmate. So that's why Anand simply played f6, and now he's blocking the attack towards the queen. And now bishop d2 by Polgar. Polgar is now threatening to play a move like f takes e5, or maybe if Anand were to play e takes f4, then bishop takes f4. And the point is to drive the queen away from the defense of the g7 bishop, and you would either have to give up the queen, or you would have to get checkmated. So, therefore, the next move Anand played is e4, making sure that this c1, h6 diagonal cannot be opened up in general. And now bishop to c4 by Polgar, developing a piece, getting ready to play bishop to e6, put more pressure on the knight on d7. And now b5 by Anand. I mean, Anand is quite desperate here, because he needs to find the right defensive moves, and also he needs to be careful not to blunder the piece back. So here Polgar plays bishop e6, and Anand plays rook to a7. He's reinforcing the d7 knight, and maybe knight c5 was probably a better move, because it forces more trades. Perhaps Anand didn't want that to happen, but I personally think that knight c5 is a good move, and that it tries to exchange this very excellent bishop on e6. However, Anand played rook a7 here, and now rook c6 by Polgar. Polgar is maybe trying to provoke something like bishop b7 and then put her rook on the c7 square. And when the rook is on the 7th rank, you should know how deadly it can be. So a5 by Anand, he's trying to get some counterplay of his own. Bishop e3 by Polgar, trying to chase the rook away. And now rook to b7. If Anand were to play rook to a8, there's this problem of rook takes c8. And after rook a takes c8, for example, after bishop takes d7, Polgar is now only down in exchange. And because she's just down in exchange, this will be a lot easier to win than when you're down a piece, as she can play something like queen f2, rook g3, queen g2, rook h3. That is one possibility. And because she's only down in exchange, it's not as much material that you constantly have to go after. So this would happen if Anand were to try playing something like rook a8. And okay, he is still up material, but I mean, this is probably a better position for Polgar. So, not going into all that, Anand instead plays rook b7, and now bishop d5. Polgar is threatening rook takes c8, and after rook takes c8, bishop takes b7, and she'll just be winning. So rook b8 by Anand, he's simply trying to move his rook away, and now, finally, Polgar has gotten her rook into the 7th rank. b4 by Anand, trying to get some more counterplay, and now b3 by Polgar, trying to nullify the counterplay that Anand is getting. Rook b5, and this is where Anand could not tolerate it anymore. If he probably played something like rook to d8, then he could probably hold this, and in fact, rook d8 probably was the best way of trying to hold on to this. Again, this isn't winning at all. In fact, Polgar is even better, but this could probably have given Anand the most chances of trying to survive. But here, Anand played rook to b5, and now bishop c6 by Polgar. Anand cannot tolerate the attack and all the pressure that Polgar is using against him, so he decides to give the piece back up. But unfortunately, this only gives Polgar a better position. After rook takes f5, we have rook takes c8. You could just play bishop takes d7 immediately, but Polgar decides to do it this way. She plays rook takes c8, and after rook takes c8, bishop takes d7. And here, Anand, knowing that he's going to lose one of the rooks, plays rook c to c5, basically giving Polgar the choice on whether she can give up her dark square bishop or give up her light square bishop. She chooses to give up her light square bishop, and I think the reason why is because if bishop takes c5 is played, rook takes c5, we can see that Polgar actually has to contest against Anand's dark square bishop with a light square bishop. And usually that's not going to be a very easy task, whereas when you play bishop takes f5, like Polgar did in the game, you have a dark square bishop to contest against a dark square bishop. So there would be some chances of winning for Polgar. After rook takes f5, Polgar simply played rook to d1. She's trying to maybe bring her rook into d8. And after king g8 was played by Anand, Polgar played queen g2, and here Anand simply resigned. There is nothing he can do. There is a threat on e4. There are threats of coming into the position, and with all of this in mind and too much pressure that Anand was facing, all these factors combined together forced him to resign the game. So, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comment section, and stay tuned for more chess.